You will use the back stairs. You will take your supper in the still room, and you will not presume to be seen by my guests as though you were one of them." Lady Octavia Thornbury did not trouble to look up from her embroidery as she said it, threading her needle with the same idle cruelty she might have used to pin a moth to a card. The morning room of Ravensmere Hall went quiet around her, the way a room goes quiet when its mistress has decided to be unkind for sport. And the under housemaid by the fire kept her eyes very firmly on the coal scuttle. "A companion is a convenience, Miss Wren, not a person. You are paid to read to my mother, to fetch her shawl, and to be grateful. You came to this house with nothing, and you will leave it with a character and a small purse if you are clever, and with neither if you are not. Do remember which of us holds the other's future in her hand." Eleanor Wren rose from the low chair where she had been sitting and dropped a small, exact curtsy. And she said, "As you wish, my lady," in a voice so even and so quiet that Lady Octavia mistook it entirely for meekness. She did not see the stillness underneath it, the deep, patient, ledger-keeping stillness of a woman who has been wronged and has decided, for now, only to remember. No one at Ravensmere Hall knew that the deed to the very ground beneath their gilded feet, the hall itself and its park and its home farm and its 3,000 acres of timber and tenant land, had passed 2 months ago, by a will sealed and lawful and entirely unguessed, into the sole private ownership of the plain young woman they sent to eat her supper in the still room. Beyond the tall mullioned windows, past the clipped yews and the long carriage sweep, a single gray horse was already trotting up the avenue, its rider a quiet country attorney with a locked dispatch case across his saddle, carrying papers that would, before the season turned, undo the proudest family in the shire. But all of that was still to come. Before we go on, do subscribe now, and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and what the hour is where you sit. Because tonight's story of a despised companion and the deed that owned the house above her is one you will not soon forget. Now let us go back to the beginning, to how a woman with a quiet face and ink-stained fingers came to hold a great family's whole world in her steady hand. Ravensmere Hall had not always belonged to the Thornburys, though they had long since taught themselves to forget it. It was an old gray house of soft local stone, set in a fold of green country where the river ran slow under willows, and it had been raised 3 generations back by a man named Josiah Wren, Eleanor's own great-grandfather, a self-made gentleman of the wool trade who had bought the land outright with money he had earned rather than inherited, and built upon it a house meant to last 1,000 years. But Josiah Wren had a soft heart and a harder-headed friend, a baronet's son named Thornbury, who had charm where Josiah had character, and over the long, slow years the families had become entangled, the Wrens lending where the Thornburys spent, the Wrens building where the Thornburys borrowed, until at last, 2 generations on, an arrangement had been struck that everyone but the lawyers misremembered. The Thornburys lived at Ravensmere, and ruled it and called it theirs, and put their crest above the door. But the freehold of it, the actual deed, the bone and root of the thing, had never once left the Wren line. It had passed quietly from father to son to daughter, held in trust, paid its small ceremonial rent, and been forgotten by everyone who wore silk, because a paper in a strong-box is invisible to people who have never had to count anything. The last keeper of that deed was Eleanor's father, Thomas Wren, a gentle, scholarly man of failing means and unfailing principle, who had loved his daughter with a warmth the Thornburys would not have recognized as belonging to their class at all. He had taught Eleanor to read deeds and rolls and parish registers at his elbow in their small cold cottage, teaching her that the law was only memory written down, so that it could not be bullied into forgetting, and that the proud of the world relied entirely on the rest of the world being too frightened or too poor to read. "They will look straight through you, Nell," he told her once, in the lamplight with the rain on the casement, "because you have no carriage and no crest, and your gown has been turned twice. Let them." A person who is overlooked sees everything. And remember that the loudest claim in the world is worth nothing against one quiet true paper kept safe, and that the meek do not inherit the earth by accident, they inherit it because they kept the documents. She had been 16 then, and she had laughed and not quite believed him. She believed him entirely now. When the long illness took him, slow through one gray winter, he had held her hand at the last and made her promise just one thing: not to reveal what she held, and not to use it in anger, but to go quietly into the world and take its true measure first, and to learn the difference between people who were cruel because they were wicked and people who were cruel only because no one had ever once told them no. The post of companion at Ravensmere had come to her by chance that very spring, advertised in a county paper, and Thomas Wren had read the name of the house his own family had built, and he had smiled a strange small smile his daughter did not understand until much later, and he had said only, "Yes, that house. Go there, Nell. They have lived a long time on a thing they do not understand, and a debt that is not understood is the most dangerous kind there is to the one who owes it." So Eleanor Wren came to Ravensmere Hall in a turned gray gown with one small trunk, her father 3 weeks in his grave, the deed to the whole estate sewn flat and silent into the false bottom of that trunk, and she took up her post as paid companion to the old dowager, Lady Margaret Thornbury, who was the only soul in the house with any softness left in her. The hall took Eleanor in the way such houses take in the poor and useful, without seeing her at all. She was given a narrow, cold room under the eaves between the housemaids and the box room, 2 flights above the family and a world below them. She was to be at the dowager's call from morning prayers to bedtime, to read aloud, to write letters, to fetch and carry and soothe, and to be, in every other particular, invisible. And from her first hour in the house Eleanor began, as her father had taught her, to keep her quiet ledger, not of money, but of conduct, the column of cruelties on one side and the column of kindnesses on the other, where nothing was forgotten, and nothing was ever spent in temper. She saw a great deal. She saw the magnificence of the place, the long gallery hung with borrowed-looking ancestors, the silver that came out for guests and went back into a locked plate room thick with the smell of credit, the stables full of hunters the family could not truly afford. And she saw, underneath the magnificence, the same slow, quiet failing her father had taught her to read, the unmended roof over the disused west wing, the tenants squeezed for back rent to pay for a London season, the tradesmen kept waiting at the kitchen door for bills 2 years old. Ravensmere Hall was a proud house holding its breath, wearing its diamonds while the damp crept up behind the paneling, and Eleanor understood the whole of its arithmetic before she had unpacked her single trunk. But it was the people who told her the truest tale. There were 3 Thornberrys who ruled the house, and she took the measure of each. Sir Henry Thornberry, the master, was a florid, hearty, hollow man of 60, who hunted 4 days a week and signed whatever his daughter put before him, and had not opened a ledger in 30 years. Not wicked, Eleanor judged, only weak. A man who had inherited a great name and the firm belief that money was a thing that simply continued, like weather. His daughter Octavia was the true power of Ravensmere, a sharp and handsome woman of 30 with a cold, quick mind that might have run a shire had the world let women run anything, turned instead entirely to the management of appearances and the policing of everyone beneath her. It was Octavia who held the household accounts in her own locked desk. Octavia who decided which tenant was turned out and which tradesman was paid. Octavia who had looked at the plain, new companion across the breakfast table and decided, on principle, to make her small. And there was the dowager, old Lady Margaret, Sir Henry's mother, near 80, and gone gentle and a little vague with her years, who alone in that whole proud house spoke to Eleanor as though she were a fellow creature, and who would come, before the end, to matter more than any of them. From the first week Octavia set herself to the steady reduction of Eleanor Wren. She forbade her the front stairs and the library and the family table. She gave orders that the companion's small wage be paid a quarter in arrears to ensure her diligence. She corrected Eleanor's plain speech before guests and laughed at her turned gown and let it be known among the upper servants that Miss Wren was a charity case got cheap, to be obeyed by no one. And Eleanor bore all of it with the same level quiet, dropping her exact curtsies, saying as you wish, writing each slight down in the ledger of her steady heart. Because she had not come to Ravensmere to win a quarrel over the back stairs. She had come to bury a beloved father, and to take the measure of the proud people who lived all unknowing upon her own land, and to decide, in her own time and on her own terms, what she would do with the extraordinary and secret power that lay sewn into the bottom of a trunk under the eaves. It was on a wet afternoon in the second month that Eleanor learned exactly what was being planned, not against her, but against the old woman she had grown to love. And she learned it the way the overlooked so often learn everything, by being treated as furniture. The little book room behind the morning room was where Octavia kept the accounts, and Eleanor had been sent to it to fetch the dowager's spectacles, and was on her knees by the low shelf when the door opened and Octavia came in with the family's man of business, a sleek, oily attorney named Mr. Pell, and neither of them so much as glanced at the kneeling companion in gray, because a paid servant searching a low shelf has to such people no more presence than a footstool. It cannot be put off much longer, Mr. Pell, Octavia was saying, and her drawing-room voice had gone flat and businesslike now there was no one of consequence to charm. The mortgages on the home farm fall due at Michaelmas, and there is not the third of it in hand. My father will not hear of selling the timber. There is one road only, and you know it as well as I. There was the rustle of papers. Your grandmother, said Mr. Pell smoothly. Just so, said Octavia. Lady Margaret's marriage settlement holds the only clear, unencumbered capital left to this family, some £40,000 in good consols, untouched, because my late grandfather tied it up so that not even my father could waste it. It is hers for her life, and then it passes by her will. And her will, Mr. Pell, as it stands at this hour, is a sentimental embarrassment. She means to leave the bulk of it to charities, to the parish, to her wretched dependents and her companions and her almshouses, to everyone, in short, except the family that has kept her in comfort for 50 years. We cannot permit it. She is old, she is failing, she grows fonder by the week of that gray mouse I engaged to read to her. A new will must be drawn, leaving everything to the estate, that is, to me, and she must be brought to sign it, by persuasion if she is biddable, and by other means if she is not. She scarcely knows the day of the week. A signature is not a difficult thing to arrange from a confused old woman who trusts the people about her. A silence. Then Mr. Pell, oily and obliging, and the companion? She is forever at the old lady's side. She might prove an awkward witness, Were there ever any question raised? And Eleanor heard Octavia Thornberry say the words she would carry quietly out of that room and hold to herself for many weeks. The words a despised dependent is never meant to hear. The companion is nothing and no one. A girl off the parish notices with no family and no friends and no penny of her own. When the thing is done, she will be turned off without a character on some small pretext. And who in the world will ever take the word of a dismissed servant against the family of Ravensmere? She came with empty hands, Mr. Pell. She will leave with empty hands. No one of consequence will ever ask after her again. Eleanor knelt very still among the account books while the wet light moved across the window, and she did not let so much as a page stir. She found the dowager's spectacles. She rose when they had gone and discovered that her hands were perfectly steady. A girl with empty hands, she thought. They had no idea. They had no idea at all whose ground they were standing on. On her way back up the narrow stairs, she came upon a kitchen boy of perhaps 12 crouched weeping in the dark of the back passage. A thin child named Davy, with a livid welt across the back of his hand where the cook had struck him with a ladle for spilling the dripping. "Hush now," Eleanor said softly, and she knelt down on the cold stone in her gray gown and took the boy's hurt hand gently in her own 2 warm ones. "What is your name?" "Davy, miss," the child managed, terrified to be seen. "It were an accident, miss. I never meant it. Only please don't tell, or they'll turn me off, and my ma'am's got no one else." "You will be turned off for nothing, Davy," Eleanor said. And she pressed her own clean handkerchief into his hands, a square of plain linen edged with a small embroidered W that no one in that house had ever once thought to wonder about. A house that breaks a child over a pan of dripping has broken something far more precious than its supper. And that is not your fault, and it never was. Dry your eyes. Better days are coming to this house than you can imagine. I should know. And though Davy could not understand the strange, quiet certainty in the gray companion's voice, he stopped crying, and he never forgot it, and he would come to matter very much before the year was out. Eleanor did not act in anger, then or after, because her father had taught her that a debt remembered in patience is worth 10 paid back in temper. Instead, she did the slow, careful thing. That very night, she wrote 2 letters by the stub of her own candle under the eaves, one to her father's old attorney, a flinty, honest country lawyer named Mr. Aldous, who had drawn Thomas Wren's will and knew exactly what lay sewn in the bottom of a trunk, and one to the bishop's registry, in a careful hand, requesting certified copies of certain parish records and a certain old conveyance for her own private reference. And then she did the thing that mattered most. She set herself quietly and entirely to guarding the old woman she loved. She did not warn the dowager. Lady Margaret was too gentle and too vague to carry such a fright, and might have let it slip. Instead, Eleanor simply made herself the old lady's shadow. She was there when Octavia came sweetly with a paper for grandmother only to sign, a little matter of the household. She was there to say, mildly, that her ladyship was tired today and her hand unsteady, and perhaps Mr. Pell might wait. She was there to suggest, gently, that any paper of consequence ought surely to be read aloud first, slowly, with the dear old lady's own attorney present. And was Mr. Pell not the family's attorney rather than Lady Margaret's? Surely her ladyship should have someone of her own. Octavia, balked and smiling and furious, could not for the life of her find a way to remove a quiet companion who never once raised her voice, never once refused an order, never once gave the smallest visible cause. And there is nothing so maddening to a controlling soul as a servant who simply will not be caught. So she pressed harder, as such people do when their cruelty finds no purchase, and she set the date of the great autumn ball at Ravensmere, the family's grandest show of the year, and resolved to make of it the very stage on which the despised companion would at last be put in her place before the whole county. And the new will at last begot signed in the bustle and the wine and the late confusion of the night. The ball came on hard and bright and golden against the early dark of an October evening, the avenue lined with flaming torches, the whole front of Ravensmere Hall blazing with light as it had not blazed in years. 500 wax candles stood in the chandeliers and the wall sconces and the great branched candelabra, their light flung back 1,000-fold by the cut crystal, and the old plate fetched up from its locked room, and the gilt of the picture frames. The hothouse had been stripped to bank the staircase with white chrysanthemums and forced lilies. The long supper tables in the gallery groaned beneath a glazed boar's head and a baron of beef and towers of hothouse grapes and trembling jellies and a great sponge sugar subtlety shaped like the hall itself. All of it, every gleaming morsel and every torch and every flower, bought upon a credit that every one of consequence in 3 parishes knew about, and not one of them would name aloud. The way a man at a hanging does not mention the rope. The cream of the shire came in their carriages, the earls and the honorables and the daughters with names like jewelry, and Octavia Thornbury moved among them in emerald silk and the family diamonds like a woman who has decided that this one night, at least, the world shall believe Ravensmere is exactly what it pretends to be. And in the midst of it she set about the humiliation of Eleanor Wren in earnest. She did it coldly, before the largest possible company. When the supper was called and the guests processed into the long gallery tables by rank, Eleanor, who had been bringing the dowager down upon her arm, was stopped at the gallery door by a footman scarlet to his ears, who murmured that Miss Wren was not to come in to the supper, that there was no place laid for the companion among the guests, and that she was to take her tray below in the still room as was proper to her station. The old dowager, bewildered, began to protest that she wished Nell beside her, but Octavia swept up smiling and said, in a carrying voice pitched for the nearest 50 ears, "Now, grandmother, you mustn't make a pet of the help. It isn't kind to the girl. It puts ideas in her head. Miss Wren knows her place even if you have forgotten it." A delighted, scandalous ripple ran down the bright tables. A dowager countess tittered behind her fan, and Octavia, turning to the company at large, added with a cool little laugh, "One cannot make a lady of a parish girl. You may dress the Wren in gray, but you shall never make a swan of her. Some creatures are simply born to wait at the back stair." Eleanor stood in the gallery doorway with 500 candles burning and the laughter rising, and she did not flush, and she did not falter, and the whispering died a little in spite of itself as the company looked at her, because there was something in the way she bore her shaming that did not look like shame at all. She settled the old dowager gently into her chair with a kind word. She straightened, and then she lifted her eyes the length of that bright gallery to where Octavia Thornbury stood in her borrowed diamonds, and she spoke for the first time that whole glittering evening in a voice that was quiet and clear and carried somehow further than any shout. "Some houses, my lady," she said, "stand upon ground they have forgotten they do not own. It is a dangerous thing to mistake the keeping of a place for the holding of it. I should be careful, were I you, whom I sent to wait at the back stair." Octavia's smile curdled at the edges. Sir Henry blinked. The company did not understand the words at all, but the words went very still inside them, the way water goes still before it freezes, and somewhere far off, beyond the torchlight and the carriage sweep, in the long dark avenue, The wheels of a plain country gig were already crunching up the gravel toward Ravensmere Hall. The doors at the foot of the great staircase opened upon the cold night while the laughter still hung in the candle smoke, and the wind came in like a living thing and guttered every flame along the gallery at once, so that the whole bright company turned as one toward the dark. Two men stood in the doorway. The first was the flinty country attorney, Mr. Aldous, gray and plain in a travel-stained coat with a locked dispatch case under his arm and the unhurried stillness of a man who has come to do business that cannot be refused. The second, to the gasping astonishment of the room, was no stranger at all but Mr. Justice Carmody, the most respected magistrate in the county, a stern, white-whiskered old gentleman whose word in that shire was very nearly law, and whom no one, least of all Octavia, had thought to find arriving uninvited at a country ball. "I must beg the company's pardon for the hour," said Mr. Aldous, and his quiet country voice fell into the frozen gallery with more weight than all of Octavia's diamonds. "I am here on the most urgent legal business touching this estate, and I must speak at once, before witnesses, with the lawful owner of Ravensmere Hall." Sir Henry rose, florid and affronted and suddenly afraid. "I am Sir Henry Thornbury, sir, and I am master of this house. You will state your business to me." And Mr. Aldous looked at him with something almost like pity, and then he did the thing that none of them would ever forget. He turned, and he walked the entire length of that bright gallery, past the master of the house, past the smiling oily Mr. Pell gone suddenly gray, past Octavia in her emerald silk, past the gaping earls and the daughters with names like jewelry, and he stopped before the plain young woman in gray who stood beside the old dowager's chair. And he set down his case, and he bowed from the waist, deep and grave. "Miss Wren," he said, "forgive the intrusion upon your evening. The matter could not wait, and your father bade me see it done before witnesses or not at all." He drew from the case a single great document, old and seal heavy and brown with age, and he laid it open upon the white cloth before the whole staring county. The freehold of Ravensmere Hall, the house, the park, the home farm, the timber, and 3,000 acres of the land your guests sit upon tonight has never in 3 generations left the line of Wren, who built it. It passed from Josiah Wren to his son, and from his son to Thomas Wren, who died this winter, and from Thomas Wren, by a will sealed and proved and entirely lawful, to his only child and heir, who stands before you. The Thornberrys have lived here at the Wrens' goodwill and a peppercorn rent these 50 years, and forgot it. Miss Eleanor Wren is, and has been since the spring, the sole and lawful owner of the ground beneath this house. The silence that followed was the loudest sound those old walls had heard in 100 years. A glass slipped from a countess's hand and shattered unheard upon the parquet. Sir Henry stood gripping the back of his chair, the florid color draining clean out of his face. Octavia stood frozen with her diamonds glittering and her whole bright architecture of the evening coming down around her stone by silent stone. And Eleanor Wren stepped forward from the dowager's chair, and she did not hurry. She drew off her plain gray gloves one finger at a time and laid them on the cloth beside the ancient deed. And where the county had seen a parish drudge there, now stood something none of them had once thought to look for. A woman entirely unafraid, in full and quiet possession of herself and of all of them. "My great-grandfather built this house," she said into the ringing quiet, "with money he earned upon land he bought, and he was too good a man to turn out the friends he had lent it to. My father kept the deed of it safe his whole gentle life, and never once used it to humble a living soul. And I came here, at his dying wish, not to claim my own, but to learn what manner of people lived upon it. Her gray eyes found Octavia, gone the color of old paper. When you said one cannot make a swan of a wren, you were speaking, my lady, of the woman who owns the very floor your dancing slippers stand upon, and the roof above your head, and the bed you slept in last night. Octavia's lips moved, but no sound came. And then Eleanor turned last of all to Mr. Pell, whose oily smile had cracked clean across like dropped china. "And there is a graver matter yet," she said, and now her voice carried to the farthest corner of that frozen room, "which is why I have asked Mr. Justice Carmody to do me the honor of his presence tonight." She let the silence stretch until it ached. "I think you had better explain to the magistrate, Mr. Pell, the new will you have lately drawn for the Dowager Lady Margaret, the one that strips her own charities and her dependents bare, and leaves her whole £40,000 to her granddaughter, and which you and Lady Octavia have been pressing a confused and trusting old woman of near 80 to sign, in private, without her own attorney, by her, and without ever once reading it aloud to her. I overheard the whole of it in the book-room, Mr. Pell, 2 months since, on my knees fetching her ladyship's spectacles, while you two great people discussed how the company was nothing and no one and would be turned off without a character before the thing was done. I wrote it all down that same night. Mr. Justice Carmody has read it. So, now, has half the shire. It was Mr. Justice Carmody himself who spoke the family's ruin aloud in a slow, dry magistrate's voice, because Eleanor had decided long before that night that she would not soil her own mouth with the doing of it, that the law and the truth and the slow exact turning of justice would deliver the verdict, while she stood above it with clean hands. The procuring of a will from a person of failing mind, by persons standing to gain by it, without independent counsel, the old magistrate said into the dreadful hush, is, where it can be shown, a very grave matter indeed, touching upon the criminal as well as the civil law. I have this evening seen Miss Wren's contemporaneous account, sworn and dated. I have spoken privately with Lady Margaret's physician, who will testify to her confusion, and I have seen the draft will itself, which Mr. Pell was unwise enough to keep. Mr. Pell, you will attend my chambers tomorrow at 9, and you would be well advised to bring an attorney of your own, for I doubt the Law Society will permit you to remain one much longer. Lady Octavia, you will attend also. There will be no signing of any paper in this house tonight, nor any night, save under the eye of the law. A low groan went round the gallery, and the cream of 3 parishes, which had come for a ball, turned its powdered shoulders one by one upon the family of Ravensmere, because nothing empties a room of friends so swiftly as the smell of money gone and disgrace come. And by morning the whole county would have it. The parish companion seated below the salt who had risen owning the ground, the family attorney bound over to the magistrate, the proud Lady Octavia caught at the worst kind of cruelty there is, the meddling with the trusting old woman's last wishes for the sake of her gold. The justice came, in the weeks that followed, exactly as Eleanor had let it come, not chiefly by her hand, but by the slow and certain hand of the world, which is patient and exact and forgets nothing. Mr. Pell was struck from the rolls and left the county a ruined man, his practice gone, his name a byword. The draft will he had been too vain to burn, now an exhibit in the magistrate's strong-box. Octavia Thornbury was not transported, for Eleanor would not press the criminal charge so far as that, but the thing was known, fully and everywhere. And there is a punishment in being known that no court can hand down, and no wealth can buy off. The invitations stopped. the fine friends found pressing engagements elsewhere. The marriage she had been negotiating with the Viscount's heir evaporated in a single morning's post, the Viscount's family having discovered, all at once, an unbreakable prior attachment. She who had ruled a great house and policed every soul beneath her found her own world grown suddenly very small and very cold. Sir Henry, confronted at last with the ledgers he had not opened in 30 years, sat gray and shrunken in his study while the true depth of the family's debts was read to him, and understood, far too late, that he had hunted 4 days a week upon another family's land and called it pride. And the home farm mortgages fell due at Michaelmas with not a third of the money in hand, and would have taken the Thornberrys down entirely, root and branch, into the bankruptcy court and the public shame of it, had not the one person they had wronged the worst chosen, in the end, to be merciful. Eleanor found the dowager first, before any of them, because it was the dowager she had truly come to love. She went to the old lady's warm sitting room the morning after the ball, and knelt by her chair, and told her gently the whole of it. And old Lady Margaret, who had loved her companion better than her own hard granddaughter, wept a little, and then laughed a little, and took Eleanor's ink-stained hands in her 2 soft ones. "I always thought there was a deal more to you than a gray gown, my Nell," she said. "I am glad my £40,000 is safe, and gladder still that it was you who kept it so. It shall go where I always meant it, to the parish and the almshouses and the poor children of this estate, and not a penny of it to those who tried to steal my own mind out from under me." And Eleanor kissed her, and promised her it would be so, and saw that promise kept to the last farthing. Then, only then, did she send for Sir Henry and his daughter. She received them not below the salt, but in the library, which was hers now, in the gray afternoon light. Sir Henry came in broken and bewildered, an old hollow man who had lost the firm belief of a lifetime that money simply continued like weather. Octavia came in last, white and rigid, with all her sharp power gone to ash, and she could not at first lift her eyes from the carpet. "You could have ruined us entire," Sir Henry said at last, in a voice gone cracked and bare. "You held the ground beneath us from the day you came. You could have turned us into the road the first morning. Why did you not?" Eleanor closed the book in her lap. "Because turning a proud family into the road tells you nothing about them," she said quietly, "and my father bade me learn what manner of people I had come among before I decided what to do with them. I found a weak man who never once looked at the truth, and a clever woman who turned all her cleverness to cruelty because no one had ever told her no, and a wicked attorney, and one good old soul who treated a parish drudge as a fellow creature. I am not in the business of ruin. Ruined families are tediously all the same, but a family that is humbled and knows it may on rare occasion become something better." She rose and looked at them both. "I shall keep Ravensmere because it is mine, built by my own blood and kept by my father's honest hand. But the home farm mortgages I have already bought up and called my own, and I shall not foreclose them. The tenants you squeezed for back rent will be made whole from this day, and the bills you left at the kitchen door for 2 years shall all be paid. The dowager's fortune shall go where she always meant it. As for the 2 of you," she let it hang, "you may stay at Ravensmere as my guests and at my pleasure, and learn from the parish girl you despised how a great house is kept warm rather than merely grand. Or you may take the comfortable cottage on the home farm that I shall settle on you, with an honest allowance, and trouble the wider world no further. The choice, for once in your lives, is genuinely your own." It was Octavia who broke then, not to her knees exactly, but in every way that mattered, all her cold architecture come quietly undone in the library light. "Why are you being kind to me?" she whispered, "when I gave you nothing but cruelty from the hour you came?" And Eleanor looked at her a long moment. "Because cruelty answered with cruelty only makes more of the same," she said, "and I had rather make less of it in the world, not more. You have a fine mind, my lady, that was bent all your life to the wrong work for want of anyone to bend it to the right. There is an estate here wants honest managing, and tenants want a clever advocate, and almshouses want a keen head to run them. I have no wish to crush you. I have a great deal of use for you, if you would rather be useful than proud. It is, I find, a far warmer way to live." And Octavia Thornberry, who had policed every soul beneath her and called it order, sat down in the library of the house she had thought was hers, and wept for the first time in 20 years, not for what she had lost, but for what she now saw she had so very nearly never become. She stayed. So did Sir Henry, gentle and grateful in his last years. And Eleanor did not forget the kindnesses owed, for a woman who keeps a careful ledger keeps the column of kindnesses as faithfully as the column of debts. The cook who had broken a child over a pan of dripping was pensioned off without a character, and the cruel underkeepers with her. And young Davy of the welted hand was brought up from the scullery and set to learn his letters in the great library of an evening by the new mistress's own teaching. He grew in time into the estate's own clerk, a careful, honest man who kept its rolls and rents as straight as a ruled line, and who would tell his own children, years on, of the gray autumn he had wept over a pan of dripping in a dark passage, and a quiet lady in a turned gown had knelt on the cold stone and told him better days were coming than he could imagine. They came. Ravensmere Hall grew warm again, warmer than it had been in living memory, not the brittle credit-bought blaze of that last cruel ball, but a real and steady warmth, its roof mended, its tenants made whole, its long tables open once more to anyone in the shire, high or low, who came in from the cold in need of a place at the fire. And the woman who had been sent to take her supper in the still room and forbidden the front stairs sat now at the head of her own table, and was known the length of the county, not as the parish girl who had owned the house all along, but as the mistress who, holding the power to ruin a proud family entire, had chosen instead to set that power gently down and teach them how to live. For in the end it was not the deed, nor the law, nor the calling in of debts that won the thing worth winning. The deed had only ever bought her the time to choose. What she chose was mercy where she might have had revenge, and patience where she might have had ruin, and a hard, proud woman remade into something useful and warm, rather than a proud family broken low. Pride may light a great cold house with 1,000 candles, but it is only ever kindness that keeps the fire burning through the long winter. And the truest fortune any soul can hold is the power to ruin another, and the grace to lay it down. If this story warmed you on a cold night, do subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next tale from the great houses of the past. And tell us in the comments, was Eleanor right to show even the cruel Lady Octavia mercy and a second chance, or had she earned a harder ending? And let us know where in the world you are watching from and what the hour was when you finished this story. Until next time, remember that the proudest house may stand on ground it does not own, and the coldest heart may yet be thawed by the one quiet soul patient enough to hold a whole family's world in her hand and choose, instead of breaking it, to keep it warm.